welcome back to the next next step of the Google Slides thing. I believe this is session 5, if I'm not mistaken. And what we're going to do is we'll review a little bit of what we went over last week, and then I'll give you guys some time to work on a couple of things this week. Last week we started going into thinking about more of a standard presentation after we've talked about comic books and graphic novels and Ignite presentations. So we've sort of like worked our way backwards, meaning everyone usually starts out with a slideshow as like a bullet pointed item or a bullet pointed list, and kind of death by PowerPoint like reads the bullets. The whole point about starting in the other direction is sort of showing you that you can make things that are with a slideshow piece of software like Google Slides or PowerPoint or Keynote, whatever, it doesn't matter. And you don't need to use bullet points at all. That you can make these things be interesting and unique and different without just having to slap on words. Then, one of the things we talked about with the Ignite talks, where you set the auto timings and let the presentations run. So you're focusing more on what the storytelling aspect of it, with the images just supporting it. But there are times where you may have to put some text on the slide. So one of my favorite ones, and this is definitely a favorite in an ironic way, is this slide that I use a number of times, which is my slide talking about different ways to use slideshows. And of course, this is my no bullet point slide, which, has nothing but bullet points on it, which is definitely very much done on purpose, but it's also done to illustrate a couple of points. And this is what we're going to talk about today, which is if you do have to put writing on a slide, how do you do it so it's clean and clear? Because as we talked about last time, that your presentation, your slideshow, your speech, whatever it may be, where you're using this up in front of an audience, it's not about you. And it's not about what you want or how much information you want on it. It's about the audience. And your presentation is about what the audience needs. And it's about whether or not the audience is going to stay engaged and pull from your visuals, as well as your talking, your speaking, your speech, whatever you want to call it, your dialogue. Are they going to pull out what you hope they pull out from it? Or are they just going to get confused? Is it going to get muddled because there's so much going on? So one of the reasons I use this slide for many reasons. One is just for some humorous irony that it's a whole slide about bullet points and it's not about bullet points. But it's also a good example of how, if you have to use text, you can structure the text in such a way that it breaks it up. So one thing that is not on the slide, and actually, like, I'll let you guys sort of chime in, like, what's something that's not on this slide from a writing text-based standpoint?
Sentences?
There's no sentences. So if you're going to put text on the slide, you don't need to put a whole sentence on the slide, because in theory, you're speaking to your audience. So again, we're not reading off the slide, because if you're going to read off the slide, well, then the audience doesn't need you. It's a book. Just give them the book. Let them read the book. If you're going to be speaking the sentences as part of your speech, your script, your dialogue, whatever you want to call it, the things on the slide should be reinforcing those points. So simple bullet points. Oftentimes people will just write sentences or paragraphs and then put a bullet next to it. And that's not a bullet point. That's a sentence or a paragraph with a little symbol next to it. No sentences. Strip down whatever you want to say to, again, like those sort of 6 words. Strip down each element of what you're going to cover into the most basic words that cover it. You don't need extra words. You try to get rid of a lot of the thes and that's and things of that nature. Streamline it. So like this first section, you look at this and it's like, well, that's kind of falls within the 6 words, right? If you consider the numbers words, you got 2, 3, 4, 5. You consider or to be a full word, 6. That's 6. The next bullet's only 3. So even if you break these things down, we're not using sentences. We're not expecting the audience to read while they're listening. What they're seeing is just the key main idea of what you're saying. Everyone with me so far?
Chris, can I ask a quick question?
Go for it.
So I use PowerPoints in a variety of ways in my English classroom. I mean, sometimes I use them to kind of give shape to a discussion, because I feel like if I mean, I can lead a full period discussion, and for the kids who are really like audio, oral, learners, they're fine. But for the more visual kids who tend to wander, I find like anchoring, using slides to kind of, maybe pose a question. And I'm also thinking about preparing, for the first day of school, and already I'm thinking I want to do PowerPoints in each of my classes rather than handing out a syllabi. This year, I think it would be a lot more engaging to put up pictures of, the covers of some of the books we're going to read or some of the authors, and then just have like an essential question on each slide. What are your thoughts on that
Totally.
kind of?
I mean, I would say one thing is don't use PowerPoint, use Google. The reason you should use Google.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay. No, and that's fine. It's just that some people do gravitate back towards what they're familiar with. But the thing is, especially these days with COVID, e-learning, all that stuff, the benefit, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, that like, even though like Keynote can do some better animations than Google, or PowerPoint has more customization, it's like, that doesn't matter. What matters for us is having that ability to do instant updates and where everyone has access to stuff. So that's so crucial. Now, in your case, what I would do is I would break down your presentation. So whereas this is a bulleted list, this might be the overview of the syllabus. The next slide might be, 1 or 6 word rule. This would be where you say, like, okay, class, you now know the rule, whatever, and then you give them a set of instructions. Do this. Then here would be, you would say like, do you agree? Why? What is your rule? Why? Then what you do is you're not making, notice I purposely did these without bullet points to start, because it doesn't need to be a bullet point. The key is not to like overwhelm, like make bullet points, so super short and concise bits of information. If you're gonna have a paragraph of information like that, that's like the essential question for the period with like a do now, no problem. That be a situation where what I would do is I would do this. I would only highlight these, and I'm using my bulleted list button. The bullets are not a key on a keyboard. Bullets are an actual sort of bit of formatting, which comes from up here. So when I press that, that's automatically going to bump those in. Now, this is not the same level. And this is a good question that you brought up, because it relates back to this slide. So we have bullets, which are your main bullets, which are your big ideas. The sub bullets look physically different. It's a different icon. It also bumps in and it automatically changes the font size. That is a sub bullet. So what that is that's a main point related directly to the main bullet. Now, this third tier is related. The reason why this is bumped in is that these two things here are related specifically to the sub bullet. So like down here, I have 2 sub bullets with no third level, because both of these relate independently to the main bullet. So where that would come into play in an example like you give is, I say why, I just hit this little arrow right here, this increase indent. That's a sub bullet because it relates directly to the bullet above. Same thing here. These relate directly to the bullet above. So this would be a situation where you would combine those, and you might have, instead of trying to lump all of your information into paragraphs of text on one slide, have an overview slide. We're going to cover these you know, 6 things. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, these 6 things. Then you break each one of those 6 out into an individual slide where there may be more detail, but you're not reading the slide to the class. This would be the slide that you present when you're giving your mini lesson. Then you say, all right, everyone has this presentation, flip over to slide 4 and get into your small groups and do what it says on slide 4. And then you're done, you're out of it. Because slide 4 then has the more detailed information. It has the sort of paragraph of expectation. It has some do nows. It has, you know, do next. It has things like that. And you might have a breakout like this. So you're oftentimes people try to like wedge all their content about one thing onto a single slide. You don't have to, especially if you're going to do this over time, reusing the same piece, reusing the same file, because this may be 6 lessons. No problem. This slideshow could be used for 6 lessons. And instead of calling it chapter 1, it's, you know, this is lesson overview, or let's say it's called unit. Right? This is unit overview. And this is lesson 1. Then you might have lesson 2, and you then could even have separate pages under lesson 1 if you had more things to do on that particular topic. The overview is what you're actually talking to them about, where you're talking to them, you're giving your mini lesson. It's just a couple of key points. It's nothing big, super straightforward, no full sentences, just the key ideas, putting it out there. Additional pages that you don't go over, that becomes independent work, is where you might load up with more content. The idea being is that things that have to be long form, let them read. Don't read it to them. Let them read it. You give them the summary, you give them the intro, you give them the overview, let them read the details. Because if you're going to try to read this whole slide, you're going to waste 10 minutes reading, doing a read aloud essentially. Whereas if you just talk about basic key points and you give that key sort of mini lesson, they then should be able to A, know what they're doing anyway, because you've talked about it. B, you may come in here and be like, all right, listen, get together, go to your groups, answer these 3 questions. Everyone knows what that is. They can use this slide to sort of remind themselves of what the questions were specifically, or, you know, where, you know, answer. You might have this down here and it says, you know, these questions on the class Padlet, right? Whatever it may be. Now with this one, same thing. Instead of increase indent, we're going to decrease indent. And then if I wanted to get rid of the bullet, I just press the bullet point button, and then that creates it like that. So now this slide has some sentences, but the sentences aren't in the bullet points. And visually, we're breaking it up and making it easier for the audience to see and kind of parse out the important information. Does that make sense, Amanda? So that's sort of the thing, is that we're trying not to cloud and clutter the slide with too much stuff. If there needs to be, well, that could be on a different slide that's disseminated or used in a different way, which isn't necessarily read to the audience.
I mean, you answered my question really well in terms of when I use, you know, slides for Google Slides for, discussion. You know, I'm thinking more about, you know, is it a good idea to use it as a way to kind of create a more engaging syllabus? Because I have to say, like, I used to send home the syllabus with the kids at the beginning of the year, and because like a handful of them will ask, like, what are we going to read this year? What are we doing in this class? And like, we never really, you know, talked about it. And I would always, you know, hand it out with the caveat that, you know, this is subject to revision and change as I see fit, you know, throughout the year. So I'm wondering what you think about, you know, the wisdom of spending, you know, some time on the first day saying, like, these are our essential questions, these are the texts we're going to read, and, you know, putting that in a PowerPoint form. Or should I just the old syllabus?
I mean, and that's a good question, because that's one of those things where it's like, I feel like don't throw out the baby with the bathwater type of thing. Like, you're digging slides, you know it more, you're more comfortable with it, you're like, this is awesome. But it doesn't mean that everything you do now has to be a Google slide file. If your syllabus works in a standard Google Doc syllabus way, leave that, and that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with it staying in that place, because I don't even want to say traditional, because traditional almost sounds bad, but it is. Like, but everyone knows what that is, right? Like, this is the document that sets the stage for the year. Cool. You're not necessarily using it as a day-to-day working document. That's like your overview, sort of here where we're at. That's kind of, it's the framework, right? You might use the Google Slides for each section of that syllabus. And if you wanted to, if you were planning this, and if you knew you were going to do something like this, where you have sort of a lesson and a do now as part of a unit, you may create all those slides up front and link them in the syllabus so people know. And the slideshow may be blank at the beginning, but they say like, oh, coming soon, or coming November, or coming whatever. So you could use the syllabus to kind of give a straight document, like 1-2 page overview of the year or the semester, linking to other things. So everyone kind of goes, all right, if I want to see what's happening in English 2, boom, here's my document, fine. I want to actually see what I'm doing in English 2, I'm going to go to the slideshow that's related. Does that make sense? Because I think that there's value in a Google Doc. And I think Google Docs are fine. And they're great for just straight text-based things. You know, like, you review the syllabus at the beginning of the semester, right? But you don't necessarily use the syllabus on a day-to-day basis, do you? Yeah, so like, you're not putting the syllabus up on the screen. And if you did, it'd be like, oh, I can't see it. Oh, you got to zoom in, all this other stuff. Google Slides works better as a slideshow, right? Like on the screen. So that would be less of this overview and more of your day-to-day functionality. Or at least that's kind of like where my head would sort of put the difference at. Does that make sense?
It does. You know, the only thing is I'm thinking of ways to try to hook the kids who love the visual aspect. And you know, I was very excited by the Ignite talks, because I thought, wow, I could adapt this. And what if I gave like a preview of the class by just putting up images? Because
Totally.
there's so much great, you know, most of the book covers that we read, you know, I know you're not supposed to judge books by their covers, but they've been redesigned and updated, and they're bright. And it's like, I can talk for a couple of minutes about the books to kind of, I hope, in a way that can kind of pique students' interest. That wouldn't be text that I would put on a slide, but to kind of frame my little, you know, presentation, I might have just a short essential question and an image of the book cover, you know,
Totally.
to like kind of, you know, hopefully, you know, I don't know, stimulate interest in those kids who, again, are more visual.
Definitely. Yeah, and
So
you could do that. You could then, in that situation, and if you also thought, because the flip side of sort of using like slides is like your standalone, here's your handout. Now let's go to the fun stuff. If you want to make the handout the fun stuff, what you could do is, yeah, you get rid of the Google Docs altogether. You build almost 2 Google Slides. The first one is literally like an Ignite, where it's just the book cover and that's it. And that's the one you're actually going to give as your Ignite talk to the kids. Then there's a second version of that, where the slide, that using the exact same slides, except that you take the picture, you make the picture half the size, and then put a text box next to it, or a shape next to it that says, you know, this is, you know, the Kite Runner by so and so, and here's what it's about and why we're studying it. So then you give them sort of, the handout becomes, and it may even say like September, like here's the book. You know, you might have something that looks like this. Like after you give the presentation, you might have this like October, and then we'll just say like Harry Potter, right? And let's just pretend that, no, let's do this one. So you might have when you do your Ignite, you might have just this picture where you're talking to the kids about why, like why you're going to read that book, whatever. Then you may then come over here and on your duplicate copy of your presentation, you know, you might just do something like this, you know, for a whatever, whatever your explanation is. So then that way, what they're doing is they're connecting back to your original talk. Your original talk, that first period, you're showing them just a slide with just this picture, and you're like, in October, we're reading Harry Potter, and this is why we're going to read it. You're going to love it, and it's great. Then the handout has a slide that looks like this, where they're reminded that it's October. They'll connect this same visual back to what you were talking about, but then this is a little synopsis of what you were actually saying at that time. And then it's a little bit of, but it's like not so much double work, because the one that you present to them is literally just a giant book cover on a slide. So that part's easy. Then you duplicate that. So you make a copy of that whole slideshow, shrink the photo down, put in your month or your unit or however you break out your schedule, and then just do a little shape over here and just put in some basic information. Does that make sense? And then what's cool is, and I'm going to give you guys some time to build one of these in a second, is you could have this table of contents, right? Where you have these things and you could say, chapter 1, call it like, unit overview or whatever I call it. Chapter 2 is lesson 1. In this case, chapter 3 is October. So then when you highlight these particular things and insert your link, you do it to slides in this presentation. And this is where you say, okay, that's the unit overview. Slides in this presentation. This is lesson 1. And then, like we talked about last time, the reason why those title boxes are so important is because you actually see the titles there. So if you started to have a 50 slide presentation because you were doing like 2 slides for every day or whatever, those title boxes become super important. So you can do something like that. So that way, when you hand out this syllabus, you can then have bullet point, simple, no sentence overview, related, more detailed slides. You then could even have a slide, or slides that connect back to a slideshow that you did just for the kids, where they're never seeing it. They're only seeing it when you talk. You're not actually handing it out to them. But then you have something like this that connects visually to what you were doing. Does that make sense? Cool. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then I'm going to let you guys do some work on this, is when you're doing bullet points, and there are times for them, like I said, you might have just this overview of things where you're breaking stuff down, and this could be months with information between. Or here where you might have like your paragraph of text and then a couple of bullet points in the middle with some, breaking it up. Again, it's about breaking it up visually so people aren't sort of staring at this like pile of text and just like zoning out. This is the type of slide where you're going to kind of cover it verbally while it's on the screen. You're going to kind of go over it and explain it in more detail. This is sort of the do now, like, all right, now that you know what we're doing, you guys go read slide number 4 and do what it says. That's why it has more text, because it's for the audience to use more than it is for you to read to them. Bullet points aren't sentences. So punctuation is fluid, shall we say. Definitely no sentence ending punctuation because there's not a sentence. This gets tricky when you have to think about questions. So you notice, like when I came over here, I didn't put a question mark at the end of why. With bullet points, I feel like this is a little bit stylistic. Because they're not sentences, You don't need a sentence, ending punctuation. However, it can look weird and it can throw kids off if you're asking a question and there's no question mark. So even though you're not going to put a period at the end of things, you may want to, if you're asking a question in a bullet point, add a question mark, because otherwise it could look a little bit funky. You can also add things like colons to sort of, again, kind of break it out. Now, this down here is a sentence. So I would put a period at the end of this sentence because it's not a bullet point. In here with these bullet points, no longer than 5 minutes. No sentence ending because it's not a sentence. Same thing here. Now, these two, I could even shorten these two and make these two like even better, right? I could remove things. Like, what could I remove from this bullet point to make it fewer words and mean the same thing? Any guesses? And this is sort of the art of the bullet point.
For the second bullet point, you could say under 5 minutes.
So, no longer than 5 minutes. But if it's an exact, let's say it's exact.
Up to 5 minutes.
Don't even worry about that one. Let's do this one first.
Yeah.
This one's actually easier.
Yeah.
What can you get rid of in that sentence or in that bullet point to make it mean the same thing, but have fewer words? There's actually two ways to do it.
You don't need auto. You can get rid of auto.
So you can, except there is a difference between auto advance and advance.
Okay.
Because without auto advance, you may think that you have to advance them every 15 seconds. So auto advance stays there.
Got it.
So there's one word we don't really need.
You don't really need slides.
You don't really need slides, right? So you can take out the word slides. Still means the same thing, because the whole point of this is we're talking about Google Slides. We're talking about a presentation. So you don't necessarily need to keep using the word slides or things like that. You don't need to keep saying the book, the book, the book, the book, if your whole presentation is referring to a single book. You can just say what happens. Like in the text, the character does this. You don't have to say in the book, the character does, if we know that our entire presentation is based solely on one book. What you could also do is, if you wanted to, you can even get rid of this and move it.
But this really depends on the grade. With second graders, they need lots of practice and repetition in how to write a complete thought. So and how to punctuate. So do you know what I'm saying? It's like you're working with older students, but with the little guys, a lot of repetition, a lot of, complete sentence. I often say, is that a complete thought? Stop and think. So to try to teach them that in my bullet point, it doesn't have to be, it's not my audience. I'd have to consider. You see what I'm saying? Like this.
Completely. This is also more just for you as adults, for you thinking about when you're creating a slideshow, things to keep in mind when you're doing these things. Now, again, obviously, like I said, your presentation is for your audience. Your audience has to be the one that understands it. Now, with second grade, I would probably have even less on a slide, right? I wouldn't even have full complete sentences. I would have really the main key words, and I would reinforce those key words to them as I was giving the presentation. And if I was actually going to have them read something and do something independent, yeah, it would look much different. Yep. But very much in the same way, if I was explaining to them what an Ignite talk was, I would try to simplify it to be the thing. And for this, I would just change this to be exactly. Because that's what it is. It's no more, no less. It's exactly 5 minutes. So even for the little guys, I would literally have that few amount of words on there, and then we would talk about what those words mean. And I would use those as like the
For
conversation
that
starter.
audience, I would need a timer in the beginning of the year because they don't know what 5 minutes is yet. You know what I'm saying? It's like, just a different, going from fourth to second was such a learning experience. Like so many things we take for granted, they don't know, especially this year. Because they
Totally.
haven't had a full kindergarten or a full first grade.
Totally. And again, that'd be a situation whereas if I was talking about ignites with second grade, my slide might just look like this. You know, I may even change it like. And I would just say like this, and I would spend my entire like 7-10 minute mini lesson on those three things. And we would talk about it. We would say like, all right, what does one image mean? Like, okay, you have this square. What can you put on it? How much can you put on it? Well, one image. Can you put two? Well, no, one image. You know, and you use that symbol. I would use those simple bits of text to kind of reinforce and have discussions on those things. Because that's again, part of this is like if you're using this to talk to your audience, you want to make it simple for your audience. Like you're saying, you want your audience to be able to understand it. Second grade, you're not going to put a sentence up there because they may not be able to read your sentence. And then if there's 3 or 4 or 5 sentences, second graders are going to totally tune out. Whereas if you do something like this, where you say like, how long is this going to be? A couple of them will be able to read. It'll be like, oh, exactly 5 minutes. Like, okay, what does exactly mean? Well, exactly means it has to be 5 minutes. Okay, so does that mean it could be 5.5? No. You know, then you use these to have that greater discussion because I feel like whether it's high school kids or second graders, it's really about boiling down what you want to say and the information you want to get across to the most key details. So then you can have conversations with them and discuss it. And it's not muddled around all these other words on the screen that they're trying to kind of see through. So whether it be
If this slide's simple and like should be talking points.
totally. Now the exception is like with Amanda and her high school kids is she might have a more detailed slide that's kind of an independent work slide that's related. Like Amanda might use this slide with high school kids to be like, here's what you're going to do. Have the 5 to 10 minute discussion about those 3 key points and go, okay, everyone good? All right, go work independently. And if you have questions, look at slide 5 for more detail, for more information, for whatever, and then they go independently work. You as a second grade teacher won't necessarily have a more detailed slide. You as a second grade teacher may just work off of these 3 ideas one a day. Like you may be like, all right, for the next 3 days, this is what we're working on. Today, we're going to just review all 3 points. Tomorrow, we're going to do just one image. That's it. One image. Then the next day, we're going to just talk about how we do the advancement. And I do this with the kids. Like when we build, and like I was saying last time, like when we build ignites, I think I had it. Yeah, like we build the script, right? I show them everything. I explain everything to them. Then I say, okay, now that you have a sense of what this is, let's roll it back. We do the script for like a week. We do the slides where we just have numbers in there. So we just talk about like the timing and we build that like stamina and we build that understanding where they could practice and see what timing looks like. You know, and then after we do this, then they put the images in. But they'll actually leave the numbers in for like a couple of days. Then they'll delete the numbers and you build and you kind of work that up. But we always start out with super simple, clean, non-confusing language for any age, 2nd through 12, of saying like, and this goes even for adults, like you want to get across a point to adults. Like I use this with adults because it's like, there's all these things you can do with slides that aren't bullet points. Like here's 6 things to think about, you know, that aren't even the thing. And that's the thing is like, it's about being simple and clean. You then as the teacher decide, all right, if this is my slide about, you know, my fantasy book, you know, my you know, graphic novel unit, how much with second graders am I going to tackle on the first day? how much with fourth graders am I going to tackle on the first day? You know, if it's 12th graders, all right, we're going to talk about this. I'm probably going to tackle all of this on the first day. And I'm probably going to have a second slide for them to do things on their own with more information on it. And that's where you sort of have to figure out how much of this is you just kind of doing mini lesson overview, and how much of it is you doing mini lesson overview with related do now independent work. And that will be grade and age dependent. Does that make sense? Because second grade, you don't probably necessarily even need this second slide, because second, third, fourth, fifth, like we're all in the room with them all day long, right? Like it's a different vibe. High school, they're coming and going, and like, Amanda, do you see the kids every day?
I see them 4 days a week.
So 4 days a week. So like something like a secondary slide with more do now information is going to be more helpful to you, because you might not see them with a holiday or a day off or whatever. You might not see them for 3 days. Whereas we at the elementary level, we're seeing those kids every day, all day. So you might not need to have a super text heavy slide, because you're in the room with them and you're working a little bit more closely with them over longer periods of time. Does that make sense to everyone? Cool. So what I want you guys to do, and we'll do it for like a good 15 minutes or so. You can steal my stuff if you want, in terms of if you want to just have a bunch of junk and bullet points if you don't have any actual content. If you already have, like Amanda, you already have this idea for a syllabus in your head. We started this standard Google slideshow. I had you guys make them blank last week. So put a title on it. Could be syllabus, could be whatever you want. It could be just a unit. Put a table of contents slide in, even if it's blank for the time being. Because table of contents is going to help 2nd through 12th. It's going to help them navigate around when they use this as reference for when you're not there, when it's homework. Table of contents is going to be huge. Then think about one slide that's going to have a lot of bullets. And those bullets can be super specific if you're copying and pasting from a pre-existing slideshow. But think about how you would rework them to be more concise, eliminating all that extraneous language. And then if you also have something like related where you want to put on sort of a couple of sentences, a paragraph explaining a do now with a couple of bullets, something like that, where you're mixing and matching, you could do that as well. The idea is to build a couple of slides knowing that they're all slightly different. Table of contents is going to be how we, not even us, how our students easily navigate around a straight bullet point slide, simple, clean language, where if we're talking in front of the class, the kids are easily connecting and following along with it without getting like, you know, cloudy vision. And then a slide that mixes the two, mixes some sentences and paragraphs with a couple of bullets that won't be a slide you read to them, but will be a slide that they refer to on their own for independent work. Does that all make sense? All right, so let's say it's 3:46. So let's say like 15 minutes. Go work on that, and we'll kind of come back and we'll take a look at them.
How many slides did you want altogether? A title, a table of contents, one with bullets, and then one to do on their own? 4, is that right?
Yeah, 4. And if you know, and if someone like you, Amanda, where you already know that you want to mix and match, like with like the book covers and stuff, and you have an extra couple of them because a couple of them are really simple and clean, that's fine. Because then again, before we leave, we'll also remind you guys how you can copy and paste slides from like one slide deck into another. So that way, whatever you're making here, you'll be able to easily transfer to like a legit file at some point. But yeah, we'll go to like about 4 o'clock, a couple minutes after 4, and then we'll take a look at them, and then we'll use these slides to talk more about things like the animations and the transitions and, you know, layering and other objects, when to and when not to, and things like that. Cool.
Sure.
All right, go forth. All right, so the question is about the sub bullet. So I'll point out again how you adjust your bullets and move your bullets from sub bullets back to full size bullets and vice versa.
Oh, wait, I think I just got it. I figured it
Yep.
out.
So the big thing is, yeah, you could use the tab key, or you could use these indent, increase and decrease indent buttons. And also too, if you've gone in and if you've made a sub bullet and then press return, it's going to stay a sub bullet. And if you want it to go back to being a main bullet, that's where you would use that decrease indent button to bring it back one level. So those two buttons are key for moving your bullet points from main bullets to sub bullets, and then from sub bullets back to main bullets. Cool.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
So to do the links, it is a little bit funky. So if I highlight something, insert link, it does say next slide, first slide, but down here at the bottom, it says slides in this presentation. And if you click on slides in this presentation, then you'll actually see next slide, previous slide first, but then also slide numbers. And if you've actually written anything in the title box of those slides, it'll actually appear next to the slide number the exact same way it does. So like I misspelled or I did a capital A on the table. I did that actually in the content of the slide, and that typo shows up in here. So when you do the link, just look at the bottom of that box. It will say slides in this presentation. And then you click that, you can then scroll through. And that's why those title boxes are important, because they'll actually give you the text next to the slide number.
Thank you.
Cool. Is everyone good, or should I give everyone a couple more minutes?
Another minute. I'm still looking for the slides in presentation.
No problem. I'll give everyone a few more minutes. So, all right, now that we've spent some time working on these, let's start. So Kathleen, why don't you share your screen and we'll take a look at yours. See what you've got. We'll solve some of your linking problems. And
All right, let's see. I've got it in present because it did seem to do it in the
Yep.
beginning. Can you see it?
yep.
All right, let me move you guys off the screen. All right, writing, where do ideas come from? And then finding writing ideas, table of contents. And then these are hot links to the next slides. Artifacts,
Yeah.
if you click on that, artifacts. And then because it's second grade, the idea is what is an artifact and thinking and feeling. So I remember a time at the beach when I was burying, my kids in the sand, and I can tell that story. So that's an idea I could write about. How was I thinking? What was I feeling at that time? Well, the weather was warm, it was sunny, there was laughter. And this is how I teach writing to the kids to come up with ideas for their writer's notebooks. So I'm going to include how I was feeling and what I was doing. So that would be the first one.
That's awesome.
Now let's see if I go back. Now, if I want to go back to to the table of contents.
So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, because we're going to go back to what we had talked about a couple of weeks ago, which is editing the slide theme and putting sort of like the little breadcrumb on every slide. And you'll sort of have to pick a place for it.
So if I click here to go back like to 3.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So then here's another thing. Maybe you don't have an artifact, but maybe, and I give them actually an organizer where they write down either an artifact, a person, or a moment. So if they were to do the people, and I think I have to go back one more. And then again, it's like, think of a time when you were with some friends, oh, I can remember the time at the beach, with the family, and Jesse and John were younger. And then, and then I would tell them how I was feeling here.
Cool.
And I think I did the same thing. It was little struggling. I'd like to be able to just go right back to it. And then moments is the next one. And if you click on that, it brings you to, again, and the theme for this whole thing was the beach. And I was playing around with transitions and, how you're thinking and feeling. So we saw the dolphins jump. It was so much fun. We, sat there and watched, and I can't wait to go back to the beach again. And then, so where do ideas come from? And I wanted to put that table of contents here so they could see the organizer. But when I clicked on that, it didn't come back. And then this was the conclusion: people, moments, artifacts, writers remember. So, but I couldn't see, here's where I was trying. Oh, because I'm in present. Hold on, let me get escape. I half the time I don't even use escape in the classroom because I just find it easier to edit. You know, it's like you touch things, it's hard to go back and forth, whereas you can just hit the slide when
Yeah,
you're there. So here, I wanted to go, I was going to actually put number
Insert.
8, the 8th slide in, or,
yeah.
but when I went to it, let's see, insert link. And
So
it,
you don't see it. So if you, because it's hidden by the speaker notes. So what you could do is you could take the speaker note box. You see the 3 dots on the speaker note box. Nope, right in the middle of it.
yep,
Yeah, drag that down. Now, nope, just drag it down.
like I did, it made it everything bigger.
Yeah. So leave that now, click on highlight those. And then do the insert link. And then if you actually take you're on a MacBook.
Yeah,
So if you put your cursor just off to the side of the box on the slide, use 2 fingers on the trackpad to scroll, not inside. Yeah, right there. And it should, oops,
yeah.
because it's
I
there.
think
So then what you could do is, so then what you do, this is, so go back to that slide. So go to the view and change it to 50%.
Yeah. And
And
now
then,
I let me do it.
yeah, and now do the
So it was
insert.
just out of sight. It was not that I was doing
Yep.
anything different.
Nope.
All right.
And then same thing, it just gets a little, you gotta go like out.
It's still not there. Isn't that
Yeah,
bizarre?
it's there. It's just, it gets hidden sometimes. So like what, because of, and
Yeah.
sometimes it'll let you do that slide. So what I do is in this situation, if I can't do the little 2 finger thing on the side to kind of scroll down a little bit and it's touchy, is
Yeah.
just bring that shape up on the slide.
Then move it afterwards.
Yep. Just bring the whole, like move that whole object up and then highlight the thinking and feeling.
Yeah. And so then I
And
was
then
wondering
put
if
the
that's what
link.
it was. I was trying
And
to
then you
get it.
see it down there. It's like, yeah, it's right there.
Yeah. All right. I'll play with it after.
And then move that. Sometimes if you do that, the 2 finger thing, but do it slowly, it'll
Yeah.
bring it down just enough. Because if you do it too fast, it'll take you to the next slide.
Okay. All right. I'll
Makes
go back.
sense. Cool. So we'll stop that. Let's go. Donna, you want to show us what you've got?
Yeah, okay. I started doing slides for our first reading unit. And so I didn't get very far. I just did the cover and I put the cover of the book we're reading. And then I started making a table of contents. And here's really the next slide was really the first session. So I just started setting that up.
Cool.
That's pretty much it so far.
Nice. Now, what I would say is bring that back up for a quick second.
Yeah, sure.
And so this would be an example of like with the kids, you may want to think about the those arrows, because when I look at this, I see that arrow that's talking about good readers is a little bit tough, right? Like I got to actually turn my head. And then the arrow is larger than the example, right?
Yeah.
So in this situation, I don't like those arrows. I don't ever use those arrows. What I do in these situations is I would take a shape, just a rectangle,
Mhm.
and write the words in the rectangle, and then use the line arrow to point to where you're going because it's a thinner arrow.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Because that arrow with that information is like it's as large as the thing itself. But if you take if you were to take that text and put it just in a rectangle and make it sort of on this, horizontal, so it's easy to read. Next to the line, there's a little drop down. You can choose the arrow and then point the arrow over. And then what that'll do is that'll still affect the directional pointing of it without it being this massive block in the middle of the slide. Same
Okay.
thing with the other one too, is like when you're doing these things, and I'll share real quick, is sometimes you got to think about, does the like, is something like the arrow necessary? So meaning, if I insert an image and I just do and I don't know, let's do this, right? So if I put this in, and I have this here, I don't necessarily need to have, and this is the line I was talking about. Like if you just use this arrow, right? I could have this, and I can make this arrow thicker, and I could point. And then I would take a shape, you know, right? You can do something like this. Now, what I generally advise too is with these types of things, is again, simplifying it. Because if I look at this and I say, is there really a need for the arrow? Because what you could do in that situation is you could delete the arrow and use this almost like a caption and put it something like that. So that way, if you had two images, and then let's say you had this, and we were talking about two different types of notebooks or something, right? You don't necessarily need to have the arrow to add an extra element to the slide. What you could do is you could have your two pictures, and I would even take this just to kind of clean it up, put that in the center, and then do something like this and say, you know, I'm putting those in the center of a, you know, daily planner. And usually like that, and then what that does is it affects the same result where you're drawing attention to that image and you're explaining what that image is, but what it's doing also is it's allowing you to save space. So you're not having to shrink the image to fit the arrow in, because otherwise doing it like this, you know, when you were writing like this, you were having to tweak this image to fit the text and to have this in here. Whereas what you could do is if you were to get rid of that arrow, you could then even make this image larger, meaning it becomes more easy to read, and not read like in letters, but read as in like visually readable, where the kids could see what they're talking about. So it allows you to make that to become a larger visual, more impactful visual, because we're not making the focus that arrow, we're making the focus the image with a small caption on it. Does that make sense?
I guess what I'm doing is not really keeping in with the 6-word rule then, because I'm kind of doing, you know, a slideshow of the unit. So I guess I'm not doing the right thing.
No. The 6-word thing is fine. Like you're doing something, there's always deviation in that. What I'm saying is right now on that particular slide, you had your title box, which was bordered by a thick black border. You had text, which was in sentences. Then you had two images where you were giving examples, but those two images were small because you were accounting for a large arrow pointing down to an image and a large arrow sideways to an image. What I'm saying is get rid of those two arrows. Make your two images that are examples larger. Take the text that's inside of those arrows, put them instead in a rectangle, and then make them like a caption on the image. So that way the image is more prominent. Because right now, in looking at that particular slide, your arrows were almost as prominent as the examples, where you don't necessarily want your captions to be as large as the thing they're describing. You
Yeah.
want those images to be more visible and more readable as images, because that's what they're there for, right? They're there as exemplars.
Yeah, no, No, that's, I just realized as you're talking that it's, yeah, I don't need the arrows actually. So.
Yeah, no, and that's
I
fine.
totally agree.
Yeah, and they're there, like, and everyone does this, and that's fine, because like, and that's part of the process. You kind of go through and you say like, all right, like, I want to point to these things, but it's like, well, wait a second, do I need to point to them? No, I could just toss a box in a corner of the image or just off to the side, where just even like think about the texts that you guys use in school, whether it be Time for Kids or whether it be, just like a textbook. The captions or the call out boxes or those sidebar boxes, there's never arrows pointing to things. They just become these self-contained pieces. And then the kids understand that if, as long as that rectangle with the explanation is touching the image, that's the explanation for that image. And that's why I like what you did, where you have those two images on opposite sides of the slide, because that way you put a rectangle under one, a rectangle under the other. Everyone knows what those rectangles are related to because the pictures aren't even close. And then that then helps draw the attention more to the exemplar of the image than the actual like text. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Cool. Joanne, what do you got?
I also did the first unit that I'm going to be teaching, interpretive book clubs. And mine are, the slides are a bit lengthier just because, the material the kids need.
Totally.
So I was linking it, it kind of worked. And I was just making, like the book club constitution, and then I had linked here like some examples of reading platforms that we've used in the past. And then I just used the suggestion you gave, Donna, of the caption down below.
Yeah.
And I'll add more because the kids used Google Slides last year to respond to their reading, as well as the Google Sites. This should actually go before. And then just the reading response for them to respond after they were done meeting with their groups.
And now here's a place where I would say, as a devil's advocate from a design standpoint and understanding visually the difference between bullet points and paragraphs, is, does that first thing need to be a bullet point, or can it just be a block of text up at the top?
It can be just a block of text.
Right. And all you have to do, and same thing with the you could jot about, I would take away the bullet points on those two blocks of text, because then what that does is and all you have to do is you just highlight and you just click the little bullet point box to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because then what that does is it sets apart. Now those things down below could be bullet points. And what I would do is, to make it even more visibly separate and clear, is where you have describe it in that first bullet, I'd press return and make that a sub bullet. And then do tab. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, increasing it.
Okay. Yeah.
And then what you would do is, because then that way, as somebody who's then looking at it, they're seeing that they have to read the top as like sentences, right? So they're familiar with that, because it's like, oh, this is just a block of text. It's a paragraph. Another paragraph, you could jot about. Awesome. Then when you start laying out your actual bullet points, now the bullet points are starting to be a little bit more clear and concise.
Yeah.
You could even, if you wanted to, depending on how you thought your fifth graders would respond to it, for that sub bullet, instead of describe it using specific details, simplify it and just say use specific details.
So it'd be less text, right?
Less text. You're still focusing on the important part, which is specific details. And it's more of a reminder. So just put use specific details. And I think that's good, because then now this is like clean. And the kids are seeing a difference between what they're having to read as sort of narrative versus what are the key ideas that they need to focus on. And that's sort of a good example of how you blend the body of narrative text with simplified bullets.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, and that's how far I got.
Yeah, no problem.
That's all I got.
No problem. Awesome.
Thank you.
Amanda, let's see what you got.
I'm doing, sharing the screen. I need to go back to present. So this is my advanced topics course overview. for this year. I didn't really do the table of contents. I figured that would be probably like the last thing I'd do once I had all my slides, and I could put in links. Tried to, be brief in my overview of course content. The course is really focusing on form and content. So that's a little overview of like the actual text we're going to read, but also divide it up into like different movements. And then these are essential questions that I probably wouldn't read or talk about, but just refer the kids to if they're interested. And again, I kind of broke those up by form and content. I don't know if you want me to stay on the slide or keep going.
No, that's good.
And then I have basically 4 covers of 4 texts that we're going to use. And this is where I thought I could just give them, my little spiel on what the text is about, how we're going to be approaching it. So, more speaker notes and really, light on visuals. So those were just covers.
Awesome. Yeah. Now, the thing about your slide, and to kind of go back to what Joanna said a minute ago, which is important, which I started talking about this way back in the first session, and I've kind of been hammering it in, is purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people will just build slideshows and slap everything on there. You had that one slideshow with your essential questions where it had sort of like Joanna just showed, which was like a little bit of text and a bunch of bullets.
Mm-hmm.
Your bullets were super wordy.
Yep.
But you said you're just going to leave that for the kids to look at. And that's key, and that's purpose. And that's understanding that, like, all right, that's a bit of a text heavy slide, but it's not one you're going to like read to the kids. It's just there for them to refer to. And that changes the purpose and the rationale for how you would build a slide. Because yes, there will be times where you text heavy, like a Joanna said it too. She's like, yeah, mine's like this because this is kicking off the unit. It's like, right. And it's like, as long as you're building these slides with this sort of purpose and intent in mind, where you're like, all right, I want to show this to the kids and walk them through it. So I'm going to make it cleaner. I got to put more text on this slide because it's an independent work slide.
Mm-hmm.
That's important, because then you know that you're not going to sit there and you're not expecting yourself to read that slide to the kids, because that will bore them out of their minds, whether they're 2nd graders or 12th graders. And then that helps you as a creator, as a content creator, know, all right, what's a good slide to like keep my audience engaged, and what's the least amount that they need versus what do I have to add on something to make it beefier if I'm not there for them. And that's good. And that's why like those slides were different, because some were for live use and some were for independent use. And then that changes the purpose and intent. And it's good to have that understanding. So I thought that was solid.
And just, I guess, one quick question. I mean, given that I'm probably going to spend a lot more time on the last 4 slides, which were just the cover images, in terms of sharing the slides with the kids so they can kind of digest at their own leisure, probably makes sense to put a link to the slideshow on my Google Classroom and just say, or to leave the slide. I mean, I do this sometimes in class. I mean, it always feels a little awkward and forced, but I will sometimes have a text heavy slide that I just put up and I don't say anything. I'm like, okay, take a look, and I give them a minute. That's always tough, because I feel like kids read and process at such different speeds that I don't know.
Well, that's where I would sort of break down the 2 slides, and if you're like, the do now or whatever, the thing that you're going to leave up is like, review the next slide, do the work, submit on Google Classroom. Like that, the 3 bullet point slide would be what you leave on the screen. Then the kids know that they have to go click on that actual presentation and go to slide 6 to see the text heavy one. And then that way they can then process that in their own time and at their own pace. And then that example too is where you may consider keeping your text-based, your Google Doc-based syllabus. And then once you make this slideshow, you link it in the syllabus. So whether it's, you could also upload it to Google Classroom if you wanted to, totally. Put it on your website, school wires, like do whatever. But that would be a way where you could kind of integrate the 2, where you say, all right, like, here's today's slideshow for the new unit. I've linked it in the syllabus. You all have the syllabus. It's on Google Classroom. I'm going to go over, we're going to talk in class about slides 2 and 3, but you'll notice, you know, slide 1 is a table of contents. So like in a few minutes when you're independent, poke around at your own pace. So here's slide 2, you know, XYZ, Shakespeare, sonnet, you know, prose. Slide 3, write your own prose, post it on, you know, go to slide number 6, follow the directions, post on Google Classroom. Then you leave that one up and the kids go, okay, they open up the slideshow on their own machine. They go to slide 6, read the more detailed explanation of what you want them to write or create or post, and they do it. And that's also a way for you to, in the classroom, watch their engagement, because then you can see how many people are clicking on that file. Right. So you can,
yeah, I mean, that's what I used Pear Deck a lot this past year, because I felt like that was a really great way to make slides interactive.
yeah.
You're suggesting doing something a little different, which is like for them to actually like post a response as an assignment, like create an assignment in Google Classroom.
Or what, I mean, whatever. That was just an example. Like it could be, you know, whatever the do now is, you know, whatever the more detailed thing is. Like I'm also referencing that because a lot of what we do is we do things like with Padlet and stuff like that. Hold on one second. So with relation to like Pear Deck is great because Pear Deck, Nearpod, the slideshow becomes the quiz, the engagement, the whatever. What's nice about those things is you could use any slideshow and put them into them and add engagement pieces. Sometimes we at the elementary level will do things like reading groups. We'll have a Padlet where they go and they post and they do little posts about, you know, plot, character, setting. So that would be where the slide might say, we do a mini lesson on character. Then the do now is talk to your group about the character in your book and do 2 posts each on the Padlet about it. Like whatever that do now activity might be. It doesn't have to be an assignment they post to Google Classroom. Your do now on that more detailed slide could just be read quietly for 15 minutes to take notes, you know, whatever's appropriate for the lesson in that moment. It doesn't have to be. I was just saying from the engagement piece is that if you had that sort of simple bulleted point slide of go to the next slide, do what it says, then every kid in your class is clicking on the Google slideshow. So you can then look at the little anonymous rabbit thing and see how many little anonymous rabbits are actually on that slideshow if you want to see how many people are actually going into that do now section.
Okay, you have to show me. I have no idea what the anonymous rabbit is.
Oh, so if you give them a link to a presentation, you could see how how many people are on it at a time.
Oh, okay.
Like not if you don't give them, if you just do the share and you just shared it, not in present mode, in the top by the share, like you can actually see all the little circles. You can see all the people that have joined it.
Oh, interesting.
And have looked at it, or are looking at it at that time.
Yeah, I can see that on Pear Deck. I didn't know you could do that as a feature of slides.
Yeah, and like I said, if you're familiar with Pear Deck, then you could take this slideshow and drop it into Pear Deck and do it that way. And it's, yeah, you don't have to create a thing that's a turn-in thing. There doesn't have to be a turn-in aspect to all of these. It's
right.
More a matter of, you know, giving them the breadcrumbs, giving them the same slideshow so they can then go back, review the little bullet points you went over, look at that detailed slide, and then go ahead and be independent while you're kind of circulating and doing what you do. Yeah.
I feel like this is the one presentation, probably the only one I'll do all year. There's probably not going to be much of an interactive component. I don't know if that's a bad thing, but just because it is here, it's just presenting an overview and information. I'm trying to think.
And totally, and that's fine. And like I said, like for all these things, it's purpose. So like I'm just kind of like spitballing based on like different things you can do, but you guys know your own classrooms and you guys know your own content and what you're going to do with those moments. So if it's not going to be interactive, don't make it. Like, don't force it. Don't force the tech or force the rainbows, unicorns, and fireworks if it's not appropriate. Definitely, like, use it however is best for you, and you're going to have to judge, because obviously, like, the second grade class is going to look a little bit different than the 12th grade class. And even in yours, like, your first day of a unit in September is probably going to look different than like mid-unit in December. There's going to be more stuff. So they should not all be the same. They should have the same sort of vibe, right? Or the same sort of consistency in terms of the kids get used to knowing that there's like a table of contents if they're supposed to navigate around it. That it's bullet points are your basic list of things. If it's a narrative piece of text, there's no bullet point next to it. Consistency of font and size, like captions on images instead of sort of all these extra arrows and stuff. That stuff becomes like the consistent norm. Then you, as individual classroom teachers, tweak and customize on the day-to-day based on the mini lesson, the unit, the whatever, and it does not always have to be interactive by any stretch. Everyone always thinks that I think that everything's got to be digital. It's like, it doesn't have to be. I mean, there might be a unit where you're just like, there's no slideshow today. Take out a book and read. You know what I mean? Like, and that's fine, because sometimes that needs to happen. So that's okay. Does that make sense, Amanda? You good? Sweet. Kara, what do you got?
I shared it with you just in case.
Cool.
But I am going to try. So I was creating, can you see it?
Not yet.
Oh. It's giving me the option like to click on it to share. Oh, you're on it. Okay, so maybe you could do it.
Yeah, I'll just do it. I jumped over to that because
so what I was doing was just creating a reference tool to kind of work through WH questions with my students. So more of the younger, maybe K2, K3 student. So that was like the title page, a table of contents with the various WH questions. And then the next page was just giving kind of the types of questions and what those types of questions are, or what types of responses those questions are looking for. My intent is to then link it, like I was starting to create the do now pages for each of the questions. But like Kathy was having, I was having a hard time. It wasn't going all the way down to like the bottom to link the slide page.
Yeah, it gets funky when you get low on the slide and you can't, like, mine for whatever reason goes up. I don't know why it just did that, but it's always there.
Right.
So sometimes, yeah, of course, mine is always going in the right direction.
I love this. Are we going to be able to share these with each other so we can use them? This is great.
Yes. At the end, the project thing that's on the blog that you guys will all put your stuff in the document, you'll basically put links into your this course folder that you made, so that everybody, including Fran and Anne-Marie, will have access to all these different things that you guys have created during this course. Cool. Yeah, and then it's just, you start the linking process. And then just while we're in here, I'll just, Amanda, this is just where I was saying, like, I could see that this is how Kara knew I was there. So if you just gave your kids, if you weren't doing a pair deck and you just wanted to see who was on it, you could just give them like the view only link, and then you would see like the little heads of the people who were there.
Oh, yes. Okay, that makes sense. But that's only in real time, right? Like, that's just like as I'm in class. Like, once they log off, that goes away.
If they're not looking at it. But if they were at home, or if they were at home, you would see that little head. It is real time. So as long as they have that tab open, you'll see that little circle there because
Right.
they're technically using it.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. But and like I said, that would be an example of like where you would just give them the view only link because you didn't want to do a pair deck. You just wanted to see who was reading the next slide. You give them the view only link, and then you look and say, oh, I have 12 kids in the room. Do I have 12 little circles up there? Awesome. Everyone's at least on it. You know, that's sort of like the cheap way of doing something without going through the whole thing of pair deck. Sarah, what do you got?
I was practicing redoing my art classroom routines, which is normally a pretty lengthy slideshow in the beginning of the year. So for me, this was just a good practice for how to be more concise. So I have just a table of contents during the studio time cleanup, and it links to the slides. Just a picture to ground them. And then some of the routines that we do. So, and it's hard to be more concise, but I tried my best. When you come in, find your seat, assigned until free seating, sketchbook should be out, then start the do now. Studio time, just going through the expectations. So this is really for me to like the Ignite, like just I'm using it to remind myself of the topics that we discuss as a class. And then clean up.
Awesome.
Some of our norms and routines that I want them, really all of September is learning this. And the projects help us, master the norms and routines so that we can go into a more, independent studio environment for the rest of the year.
Totally. Yeah, and that's a good way of mixing and matching and having those like slide number 3, like a section break where you're changing gears. So even if the kids were then looking at this, they sort of see those. And then that's something that I would suggest you use as much as possible in all of your presentations. So then they start to understand as your audience that just like, we always understand that if you watch, I mean, nowadays it's different because everything's streaming, but there was always that thing of like, at least in New York, when there would be like the promo on NBC for like the local nightly news, you knew that like the episode was coming back from a commercial right after that, right? Because it was like, you always knew that they could go to commercial, but then the minute they're like, hey, check us out at 11, after Cheers for the news, you're like, oh wait, my show's coming back on. And that was the old days of how you would like stop and start the VCR.
Yeah.
Because you knew that was a norm. So same idea of like they see that sort of title slide where it's like an image and a heading. It then allows the audience to kind of mentally be like, okay, now we're switching into a new thing. We're switching into a new chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good technique. It's just then what becomes difficult is sort of making sure you remember to standardize that technique for that consistency. Because again, intent and purpose is super important, and so is consistency, because you want your students, your audience, to recognize things for all of you. Like you want to be able to have them be like, oh yeah, like this is about that, or like you want them to sort of connect the visual to your content.
I think this would make sense for me. Like I usually do the whole syllabus in the first week of school. And instead of doing that, I might do this one day, and then the next day I'll go into like grading, and just have it all live in one big PowerPoint, but break it down into these smaller bits.
Yeah. No, that's great. And what's great about these smaller bits too is like you could then use them for discussion.
Right.
It's a little bit harder to use a paragraph for discussion for something like a syllabus, but if you have bullet points, they kind of open themselves up to like, all right, so what do you think it means to, add color if complete?
Yeah.
And then like it allows a little bit of that interaction where the kids have to internalize and then kind of give back a little bit and have a little bit of that turn and talk opportunity to say, all right, there's these 3 words on this bullet point. Why don't you turn to the person next to you and sort of talk about what you think those mean to you? And then that helps them to internalize those meanings of expectations or rules, or even if it's just about the content, just because otherwise you're given the full paragraph, the kids sort of start to tune out.
Right.
But
I like the idea of having this be like the way that I format all presentations, but knowing how much I already have made, especially when we were remote, it's kind of daunting to change all of my presentations into something that looks like this.
totally.
So I think over time, I guess, anytime I make something new, it would be a goal to use this new shorthand.
Exactly. Totally. Yeah. I'm not advocating going back and reinventing the wheel. Not at all. Like, use what you have. But it's like, as you, like with anything, right? As you grow and as you sort of develop new processes, or as you become more comfortable with a medium or a format, you sort of fine tune and revise and refine. So same sort of concept. It was like, now that you're like spending more time with this, you're like, oh, I like this. So then keep that and sort of start making that more the norm. You don't get rid of, you don't go back and reinvent the wheel, but it's more like, oh, all right. And you take stuff to, I'm sure there's awesome little techniques you use that you really like from the old one. You could start like incorporating different things like that, and whether it be color scheme or whether it be, a font style, and you keep those. And then that way, as time goes on, they become more and more refined and then more useful to the audience, to the students, because they're super specific and purposeful and directed.
Yeah. And it is nice to, like, usually I would go really into a PowerPoint like this. So for me, this is like a time saver to do it this way. And it's like work, smarter, not harder. Like I should be spending my time producing my videos, not making like a art classroom routine PowerPoint look like, doesn't need to look incredible.
No. And especially things like rules or routine ones or expectation ones, so much of those things should be discussions with the kids.
Yeah.
So you want them to be simple and clean, because it's like, what do you guys think about this?
Right. I don't want them to be spending the time staring at the screen. Yeah.
Right. It's like, all right, like I saw one that talked about like, music, no requests or whatever. Be like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? Because that some kids are like, well, does it mean that I can make her? It's like, no. What does no requests mean? So like it just becomes more simple. And like, yeah, like you said, it's working smarter, not harder, and laying it out. And like we've all said, like even with second graders, like they need less and they need more detail and more repetition, and especially rules, routines, overview concepts, things like that. Simple and clean is going to allow them to literally and figuratively sort of see the content and internalize the content. And then there's plenty of places to have more meat, whether it be videos or whether it be sort of text heavy narrative do now slides that you don't read to them, but that they do independently. Awesome.
Thanks.
So what we'll do is, for the last few minutes, we're going to talk real quick about animations on these, because I know that there's interest in that, and it does matter, because with text, we did a little bit of the animations with the comics where we had like the clouds floating around and the waves moving. It's the same animations for text, but excuse me, they function a little bit differently, because you could do them by paragraph, which means you animate the text box. But if you do it by paragraph, it means each bullet point or each time you press a carriage return is going to come in differently. So what I mean by that is this. So if I take this, for instance, my little overview slide. So if I can only animate the entire box. So if I insert my animations, it's going to fade in all the text in here. So do it on click. So now if I press play for my preview, you're going to see it starts out with nothing, because it's an on click. If I click, everything comes in together, because you're only able to animate that object. So what you do though is you can do by paragraph. What that's going to do is it's going to separate out and essentially create sub animations of the same style. You can't choose different animations for each thing, nor would you want to, because then you get into rainbows, unicorns, and fireworks. Like, be consistent with your animations. Don't have different animations on different pages. Be consistent. So that way, again, the audience is comfortable and knows what's happening and isn't distracted by the flash. So now that I did by paragraph, still going to show up blank. But now when I click the first time, all that's going to show up is that first bullet. And then every time I want a bullet to show up, I have to click. Now, with a slide like this, it's kind of annoying. There's a lot of bullets, right? So I press stop. So what I can do is I can do after previous by paragraph. Now when I press play, I'm not clicking. All of these things are just happening automatically after the one before it. So this is the way to kind of cascade these things in. And that's how you could play around with the animations. Now, I don't recommend doing, because I know it always becomes a thing of, and my kids always do this, my students are always like, well, can we do zoom outs and fly outs? Like, no. I mean, sure, you could, but should you? Reason being is, what's the reason for it to leave? If there's no reason for it to leave, you're just going to another slide. You don't need to have an out. You need to have an out if you wanted to reveal something behind. Meaning, like, let's say this picture was back here. And I'm going to add an animation to this one. And I'll fade in on click. Then I'm going to add an animation to this one. We'll fade in on click. So now if I were to play it, now you see nothing. But then I can see my checklist. And then I can see my planner. Now, if I wanted the planner to disappear, let's say to reveal, I might put this up here. And then I would click on this one and I would add another animation and I would fade out. So what that's going to do is this. It's going to show nothing. Then I'm going to see my planner. Now, the other one's going to fade in behind it. Nobody's going to know it's there. So the reason I would do a fade out, so this picture, this calendar now has the daily planner has two animations. It has an in and an out. I would click the fade out to reveal what's behind it. That's where you would want to use the outs, is if you want to reveal something. And then to simplify life, I would make this fade in after previous, meaning I click to see my calendar, and now my other one is faded in behind it. Nobody sees it, but I want to reveal the answer. I want to reveal what's hidden. I click and I reveal what's behind it. And that's where I would recommend using the outs. Any questions about those stages of animation? Everyone good with those? Now, transitions are what goes between the slide. Now, again, I recommend thinking about purpose and intent, right? If you're just going from one slide to another, does it need to have some form of change? Now, even with the little kids, a lot of times people are like, well, but they're little and they get really excited about like flashy things. It's like, certainly they do. But is that transition going to distract them from the content? Are they going to get so wrapped up in the coolness of that transition that you lose them or lose their focus on the content? Maybe even an issue with the high school kids, because I can see high school kids getting all goofy about like a QB transition or a goofy animation. So again, it's all about like purpose. So when we do transitions are a little bit different. They appear in the animation box, and you'll see them up here underneath. It says motion. You say slide transition, says none. So you could do things like cube, and that does that. Spins it like a cube. You could change it to like, flip. There's not a lot. And that's just a flip. Now, again, is it gonna add value to it, or is it gonna distract your audience and pull them out of the content because they're sort of drawn to the flash? What you could also do, which is really nice and easy, is let's say we wanted to change it, whoops, from flip to, oh, I gotta stop it. From flip to dissolve, which looks like this. I can, if I wanted to, I can apply it to all slides. So I'd only have to do it once and it would apply that transition to every single slide. You can't apply animations to every single slide because every single slide might have different amounts of objects on them. So you can't do that. But one slide changing to the next, it's one move that always happens. So that you can apply to all slides if you want with the same time and things of that nature. Animations you have to do automatically. And again, with animations, you got to be thoughtful about, do you want to have it click? Do you want things to happen automatically? And the other thing is, who's driving it? Meaning, if you're driving it and the kids will never drive it, meaning the kids will never click through it, you can put on those animations and have things be delayed and stuff like that. If you're expecting your audience to navigate through your presentation, I would be very wary of using animations because they're not going to know how it's built. They're not going to know what's supposed to happen. They're not going to know if they're supposed to click a bunch of times. They may click too many times and advance the slide when they want to go back, and that may be too confusing for them. So you really have to think about sort of the brevity of it. Is like, you could use them, but is somebody else going to understand how your animations work? So if you're making one presentation, both for you to show the kids and for the kids to work off of, I would not recommend animations, just because then they're going to have to know how to trigger those or what happens after or before. If you're doing it just for the showpiece, certainly you could schedule those things and you could play them out because you understand the structure of that build. Make sense? Last thing I'm going to say, and then I'll send you on your way, and then we'll do a little bit more of this next week, is like the little table of contents button. That is able to be done in two different ways. So let's say I wanted to put a little table of contents button. I'm just going to write table of contents. And I'm going to resize this and stuff in a second. Let's make this link to slide 2, table of contents. Now what I'll do is I'm going to make this super small. We'll make that like size 10. And I'm going to make this box be the same size. Right. Now what I could do with this is I could decide I'm going to stick this, I don't know, let's say down here. Now if I copy this, I could click on any slide and it'll paste in exactly that same spot. Alternately, what I could do is I could go to view theme builder. It used to be master, but I could come here. Now, if I wanted to, I'm highlighted right now on my title and text box one. I could paste this in and I can move it. Let's say I move it. I'm just going to stick it right here in the middle just for demonstration's sake. So by doing that, what that's going to do is that's going to automatically place that in that middle section on every one of my slides. But it's also going to mean that every time I make that type of slide, it's going to automatically be there. And I can't mess with it. It's buried in the theme. It's hidden. So obviously you don't want to stick it in the middle. But if the point of this is that if you want to have one sort of on every slide automatically where you don't have to worry about it, you need to pick a location to place it. Pick a location that is not going to be the middle of the slide. So, bottom left, bottom right. So like, let's say I just put this down here. That might be a good place to put it So that way I know that whenever I'm building a slide, I got to make sure that nothing is going to be in that bottom left-hand corner blocking that. And then as you talk to the kids about it, you say, listen, table of contents. Now this shows up here because this is that style slide. No problem, whatever, it's there. So then you would just, as you're going through this, you would point out to them that there's this table of contents button here that will always take them back, no matter where they are, to that table of contents.
Okay, I just want to understand how you did that. Like, I'm thinking vocabulary. If I was doing something and I wanted them to be able to refer to new vocabulary throughout this, the presentation, I it just went a little bit fast
No
there.
problem.
That the whole theme is not going to do anything other than tell you where this box is going to go. And this box, you connect it to another slide. It's like inserting a link in it. Is that correct?
Totally.
For instance, before when I wanted them to go back on my presentation and see the emotions, I could have just made this on every page show up, right?
Yes, and that's where you got to think about it, right? That's where you have to think about the purpose. So like table of contents is something that they're always going to need to go back to.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I just put in a shape. I'll do it again. I just went to shapes. Right, I just dragged it out. We'll call that TOC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Highlight it, insert my link, table of contents. Then I'm just going to make this small. It doesn't need to be big. I'll make my box smaller. And there
That
it is, right?
can be an object for younger kids, like a picture of the book or something. And
Totally. Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to, I could totally do that.
visual
Now,
like dictionary, yeah.
yep. Now, if I wanted to, if I just did book.
Yeah.
So let's say this was my table of contents. Yeah, make it nice and small. I'm even going to crop this one, double click. Get those black lines. We talked about that when we were doing the comic book. Same thing. I'm just going to insert table of contents. So that's my link. So now with this, I could take this
Yeah.
and I could manually copy it and manually paste it on every single page.
Right.
If I don't want to have to manually do it because it's a table of contents, it's going to be the same thing in every place.
Mm-hmm.
What I could do is I could copy it and go to my edit or view theme builder. This is showing me the theme. This is not showing me stuff I've put. This is not showing me pictures I've put. This is saying, this is what my bullet point is going to look like. This is like the font. If I click on this, it's telling me that every title is going to be Arial in 28. Every first level bullet is going to be Arial 18. It's just showing me what my standard consistency is. So what I could do is if I paste it here, and let's say I make it smaller, let's say I put it up here in the right-hand corner. What's going to happen now is this slide right here is highlighted in yellow, which means that anytime I do a title and body slide, that's going to be on it. So now it automatically has added that icon to every single slide. And if I click on a new one, it's going to be there in the top right.
So how would you add a new slide without having it there?
So I would do a drop down and I could choose any one of the other ones.
Any other format?
And it's not there.
Okay.
That's because when I went to the view theme builder,
Mm-hmm.
I only did it on this one. Now, if I wanted it to be on every single layout regardless, I would click on this top one and then see how it highlights all of them.
Oh, all right.
Like if I clicked on the top one and I dropped it in, then it's going to put it on the title slide. It's going to put it on every single solitary slide.
Right.
If I knew that I didn't want it on my title slide and I didn't want it on this slide, I only wanted it on I could also I could put it on this one. Right? Like, actually, let me do this.
How is that one different than the one you did put it on, the one above it, the slide above?
This is a title and text box. This is a title and 2 text boxes.
Okay.
So this one right here, so now if I do that, so this is title and body. I just added it to title in 2 columns.
Yep.
I didn't add it to title only. I didn't add it to title in one column. That's why it's not here.
So that's all of these formats in there.
Yep, that's what's in your theme
Yeah.
builder. So this is like your title. This is your section break. This is your title and body. This is your title 2 columns. This is your title no column, title 1 column. So yeah, these are all those slide layouts. So you
Yep.
can decide to put it on every single one and you choose this top one, it highlights everything. Or you say, no, you know what? I just want to make it on this, the ones that are my title and body ones. So I can even come down here and paste it over there. So now it's going to be on my title and body, title 2 column, title 1 column slides. So now anytime I add one of those, and when I do the, you can even see it. You can even see it kind of tucked in that corner right there. And you can see some slide layouts don't have it
Yep.
because I didn't put it on them. But what's nice about that is then that way it becomes consistent on every single slide and you don't have to add it every single time.
I love that. I think that would be great for reading strategies when we're doing a unit. They could just go back to the charts, because there's never room, and I always copy and paste them over and over. They'd just
So
be there.
pick a place and just know that like if you pick the top right hand corner, then you need to account
charts.
for the fact that like you can't have anything there.
That's
know?
amazing. That's really good.
Yep. And then it'll show up on any one of those slides that you choose that you've added it to. Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Everyone good? Well, alrighty. I will see you guys next week. And I believe next week is our last session, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, awesome. So thank you guys. I'll see everyone. Everyone have a good week. I'll see you next Tuesday.